This podcast is sponsored by Pax. Whether on the water, on land or in the air, Pax bags are both versatile and flexible backpacks that are perfectly suitable for your requirements in the most demanding of environments. Pax bags are highly regarded due to their exceptional performance in pre-hospital and in critical care environments. Their well-organised compartments and customisable configurations enhance efficiency in high-stress situations. They're designed with infection control in mind and are easy to clean and disinfect. So highly visible colours and reflective strips aid quick identification and adherence to quality standards, ensuring reliability. So the versatility of Pax bags caters to diverse EMS providers, and they deliver vital equipment, durability and ease of use for pre-hospital critical care services globally. I've used Pax bags in a number of critical care situations, and they're absolutely excellent, both in identification of kit, but also in identification of the reflective strips to ensure visibility. So please see the show notes for further details.
You're listening to the Pre-Hospital Care podcast on the Medics Academy Network.
Welcome to the Pre-Hospital Care podcast with me, Carl Betts. In today's episode, we will be discussing the importance of shared learning within the pre-hospital arena and identifying some key aspects and events where the shared learning has changed practice. As part of this discussion, I'm also hoping to find out how important a central community is in ensuring learning is shared as widely as possible. To do this, I'm pleased to be having a conversation with Sara Orritt. Welcome to the show, Sara. How are you doing?
Good, thank you. It's really good to be here. Thanks for having me on.
It's great to speak to you, and I'm really sort of keen to hear a little bit, first off, just so the guests can hear a little, the listeners can hear a little bit about who you are. So if you could just give us a quick bio of the Sara Orritt who we're talking to today.
Sure, no worries. So I have a day job within the ambulance service in the UK, but I have secondary employment with a company called the European Association of EMS. EMS in this context stands for Emergency Medical Services. So the European Association of EMS holds an international congress, which is fairly well known. The last one was in Glasgow in 2022. I look after primarily their communications and social media, but I also support their business administration now that they are a legal entity, and I help to organise the Congress, which is coming up soon.
Initially, what I think would be really good to get started with, because you mentioned about sort of EMS, but we sort of assume people may know what it is, but I think there's an awful lot of people may not know. So it would be really interesting if you could just offer us a bit of a potted history on sort of the history of EMS and also its mission statement and how that mission statement is a golden thread through everything that you do, linked to information sharing and sharing of shared learning.
Sure. So I guess the first thing to say is that we don't necessarily use the term EMS in the UK. It's vice versa on the continent, so they don't really have the term paramedic in a lot of European countries. They would use EMT, emergency medical technician. So different horses for different courses. And I think what started this originally was that idea that there is something that each system can learn from one another. So I wasn't around when this was first conceived. This is something that was dreamt up back in 2016. And off the back of that, the first international congress was held in Copenhagen. So it's really a collaborative of chief medical officers from across Europe who share learning from their ambulance services with one another. That's it at its simplest form. There's a lot more to it than that, but that's probably the sort of simplest way of describing it right now.
And with that, how does EMS as an entity, when you've got the chief medical officers all sort of in these conversations, how does that information, how does it share the information, and what are some of the key themes on how you feel you do this well? Because obviously you've got collaboration from different countries, you've got collaboration from different services, everybody's all got their own agendas with these things, but actually the shared learning with this is about improving patient care and improving what we do for patients and utilising as much modern thinking and as much modern research that's available. But how do you go about sharing that learning? Is it just in a sort of verbal offering, or is it offering workshops, or how does that learning get disseminated from that level?
So it started with monthly meetings. So they agreed a time, which is outside of their working hours, thankfully for me. But it's a monthly meeting where they all do their best to attend, whether they're travelling or whether they're at home. Everybody does their best to dial into this meeting. I'd liken it a little bit to herding cats, because I'm trying to get 11 very important people into a room, into a Teams call. But yeah, basically it starts with a monthly meeting. So the monthly meeting is, there's an agenda, and people can put discussion points on that agenda. So, obviously during COVID, that probably came in, I wasn't around at the time, but it probably came in very handy for them, because as things were developing in Europe, where they developed a lot faster than they did in the UK and a lot earlier, they were able to have these calls between one another to talk about how they were handling their responses to that situation. So that's one way that they share learning, is with their monthly meeting. In between times, because obviously a month is a long time in the ambulance world, in between times, there's always an open dialogue on email. So we have an account for our company. That's fairly recent, but before that, they would just email one another at their different ambulance services. And if you wanted a group response, you'd send a question out to the group, and the group would get back to you with how they handled things in their countries. So that was the basis. Then obviously the International Congress started in 2016. So that Congress, it's become incredibly popular, and not just within Europe. So where the group was originally sharing learning between different European EMS systems, we've now had speakers at the Congress from America, Australia. We have teams competing in our championship competition this year from Thailand, Malaysia. There's a lot of different places that now are interested in coming to the Congress. So as well as the learning being shared between the systems in Europe, we're now able to lean on the delegates and the learning that they bring when they come to our Congress. That has resulted in more international speakers globally wanting to come and participate in the Congress as well. We have an abstract competition at the Congress, so we're learning from researchers and scientists as well. And through that abstract competition, again, we get global learning from that. It isn't just from people who work and study in Europe. So that Congress is really integral to expanding on what even the board of EMS Europe knows and shares. We can take more from the rest of the world by hosting that Congress, and then we can share it in return. So the secondary step to all of this is what I do for the Congress, which is communications and social media. So one of the things we've done recently is we've released a lot of the footage of what we call TED style talks. The proper name for them is EMS talks, but they're done in the style of the TED Talks. So we invite speakers to come and give a 5 to 10 minute talk on something they're working on. Those are now from the 2022 Congress. Those are now all available on social media, so you can see those on YouTube. So we share them at the Congress first, and then later we share them on social media. So the whole point of EMS Europe, it's a not-for-profit, and we're doing our best to share the learning widely. So the Congress is how we kind of keep ticking. But the bigger goal is the mantra that EMS Europe lives by, which is it takes a system to save a life. And what they mean by that is the world system. We have to share from every system if we want to improve individual ones.
And it's a really important point that you make there around the sharing around the systems. And actually, it's not just about sort of the medical side of systems that we're talking about here as well that are important. It's the whole, the system as approach, isn't it? That, you might have links with the police, you might have links with fire services, because there's all sorts of cross-system learning that can happen there as well. And one important point that you raised, which I'd like to sort of pick up on, is around the fact that at the time of COVID, where it was a very quickly evolving situation, that ability to share information, cross-border, cross-system, cross-organisations in that sort of rapid nature is obviously one of them examples where your system sort of really does work. And I'd be really sort of keen to hear, is there any other examples that you've got around sort of like world events that the EMS sort of style of shared learning and open dialogue has sort of really shown itself?
You're right about the system, and you mentioned police and fire. I think what a lot of people forget is armed forces as well. So there are paramedics within the armed forces in the UK, and we can learn from them as well. So the wider your network is, the more learning you're going to take on. So you can learn from situations like the war in Afghanistan, because that will teach you trauma responses. We can learn from things that happened in the Ukraine. So we had at the last Congress a very last minute addition via video call. Unfortunately, he wasn't able to come in person for obvious reasons, but we had a trauma surgeon who was actively working in the Ukraine close to the front line who spoke to the Congress via video call. This time around, we've not delved so much into that, because one of our members holds a mass casualty exercise every 1 to 2 years in Spain. So they really focus on that immediate trauma response in a mass casualty sort of terrorism simulation kind of thing. It's not always terrorism, sometimes it's more civil unrest, that kind of thing. But they hold an enormous conference with a full exercise, with paid actors, with pyrotechnics. They employ a film company to do the special effects. They do this big exercise where they can practice a trauma response, and then the chief medical officer from there or whoever is able to will share that information with the board of EMS Europe, what was learned from the exercise that year. To give a real world sort of more recent example, some people will remember that a few years ago there was a mass shooting in Paris at a concert. Off the back of that, the French member of the board wrote a paper on mass shootings, and that was released, but also we were able to communicate with him about it as he was writing it, and we were able to share the paper when it was released with the people who follow us on social media. Now, you might not have come across that paper in the UK unless you were specifically looking for it. But the benefit of the collaboration of our group is that we knew about that paper when it was in draft, and as soon as it was published, we were able to share it with everyone who follows us.
So the network that you've got, any information that you share, just hits a worldwide network very quickly. I'm guessing that's the essence of it.
So our Finnish member is currently writing a paper about how they have managed to reduce the incoming call volume in the Helsinki region. So I think it's by something like 17%. That's how much incoming calls to his ambulance service in Helsinki have dropped. So there's lots that we can learn from that for the different systems throughout Europe, for instance. Now, that paper's in draft, but he shared early results with the group, and then the group will be able to tell him what is reasonable to implement within their services, what would work for them, what wouldn't. So when he writes his paper, he'll not only have the Finnish perspective, but he'll have the perspective of Europe as well.
And it's sort of really interesting, them points that you're making there around just because something works well in one region or one place, or, even just, one service, doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to directly correlate and work perfectly in another. And it's that whole adage that we sort of adapt things, we don't adopt them. But actually what you've got is you seem to have a package of open dialogue in that shared learning happens at that point. So therefore everybody can put their 5 penn'orth in about why this may or may not work in our circumstance. And actually, one thing that will do is speed things up, because especially change within the hospital, the pre-hospital sector, the pace of change sometimes can be a little bit slow. And actually, when you've got all them people in a room who are having that same conversation, that can actually speed things up a little bit. and is actually sort of really interesting because, like I say, just because something works perfectly in one place doesn't necessarily mean it's going to directly sort of transcend across. So that leads me very nicely onto something else that I wanted to talk about is there any risks to how this learning is shared? And one thing I'm sort of got in my mind here is the sort of risks of misinterpretation around the learning, miscommunication around sort of the learning. I'm just intrigued to know, is there anything that you've come across in your work where that has been prevalent?
I wouldn't say those risks are prevalent. I think you have to temper everything. One of the favourite things that Freddie Lippert likes to say is, if you have seen one EMS system, you have seen one EMS system. So you do have to bear that in mind, that it won't always translate between systems, what you're trying to achieve, or how you're trying to achieve it won't translate. I asked specifically the group what the risks are, because truthfully it's never a question that's come up, not for me before anyway. So I specifically asked the group what they thought the answer to that question would be. Some interventions are going to be expensive, and there is a risk that you would ostracise some countries who may not have the same levels of income or the same standard of living. So that's a small risk. I think you can still share your interventions because you can still learn from them, but you never want to exclude someone from life-saving care. So the second thing that Freddie wanted me to mention was that currently EMS Europe is working on a white paper. So this is very nearly finished, and it's going to be presented at the 2025 Congress for the first time, so it won't be shared before then. But the paper focuses on the future of EMS systems in Europe. It also looks at what we're all doing differently right now. I think in the future, we need to be mindful of technologies like AI, which are huge efficiency drivers and also very useful in many ways. But something like AI can also be used to spread misinformation. So you have to temper it, the benefits against the risks. That being said, we do use it within EMS Europe. We use AI technologies now. And one of the many reasons that they have me is because I have a background in proofreading. But yeah, I guess that's one of the risks, is that you have to watch out for technology because it's designed by humans, and all humans make mistakes. So therefore technology is able to make mistakes. And there's always going to be mistakes. That's the nature of the world. But we can mitigate those as much as possible by being a bit more vigilant and by doing things like sharing learning.
And I think that's what you've just mentioned there at the end is actually sort of really true for the network that you're talking about, because you've got lots of eyes on lots of different pieces of work here. So therefore, when you've got lots of eyes on, you're more likely to pick up, potential errors or potential sort of bits of misinformation.
And one of the benefits of something like AI or those kinds of technologies is that we also have multiple languages. So the board members come from Finland, Sweden, Norway, Denmark, Spain, France, the UK. We have 2 from the UK. We've just recently invited somebody from Austria to join, and we have a German representative, and the Netherlands. I mean, who speaks Dutch, other than the Dutch? So that you have to be mindful that sometimes when people are talking to you in English, which is the universal language of the Congress and the board, not everything will translate perfectly. And I speak a couple of languages conversationally, but my level is not the same as theirs. And they're trying to get across medical terminology in a second language. So if AI or other technologies like that help them with translation, then that is a benefit to sharing learning.
And when you talk about sort of languages as well, one thing that I was on a a course the other day where there was more acronyms and abbreviations being banded around than I've heard in a long, long time in this one particular meeting. And it's really interesting that what means something to sort of me in in the English ambulance system, as it were, when we use our abbreviations and we band these around, means something completely different in other parts of the world, in other languages, and indeed in other services sort of not too far from here. And sort of how do you mitigate that? Do you have just like a no acronym and no abbreviation policy, full stop? Or how do you mitigate stuff like that?
I wouldn't say we have a policy. But we definitely don't talk in acronyms when we're having our monthly call. And we have a rule really for the Congress, where we do specify that if you are coming as a speaker, as a presenter, if you are taking part in the championship competition, everything is conducted in English. So we have one language for the whole thing, because if we tried to deliver different sessions in different languages, we would have to employ multiple translation services, and we're just not set up financially to be able to do that yet.
Yeah.
That being said, and this is another benefit of technology, there are many apps out there and I think you can even buy headphones that do this for you now, where you can come along and use your app or your headphones or whatever technology is available to you, and it will automatically translate what's being said. So if you aren't fluent in English, it shouldn't preclude you from attending the Congress, because you would just set your app or your technology to a translation from English to your native language. So we're careful within that to also advise people not to use things like acronyms, because they do mean different things to different people. I can't really recall ever using acronyms on a call with the board, because it just would be meaningless to a lot of them. I talked a little at the start about how the term paramedic, I was using that frequently when I first started working with the board, because that's the term that I'm familiar with. And I got very quickly corrected by the French member, who said, actually, we call them EMTs. I think, you have to kind of be mindful of that even if you don't use an acronym, because there's no acronym for paramedic, it's just one word, even if you don't use an acronym, it can still mean something different to someone else.
Yeah, and it's really interesting, isn't it, that sort of just your normal everyday sort of terminology for things, it does prove a huge risk in terms of misunderstandings and things. And some people aren't confident. It's different when you're in a board style meeting where people are confident to say, what does that mean? But in some meetings, people just don't have the confidence to say, I'm really sorry, but I don't know what any of that is that you're talking about. And I think it happens more often than people give it credit for, that we should ban these things from a start, because it just it opens up the risk of misunderstanding, which when we're talking about shared learning and risk, that is one of the risks, isn't it?
Yeah, so I've worked within 2 ambulance services in the UK, and there were slightly different acronyms between each. Not mega different, but slightly different. And you do have to adapt to your language style when you move between ambulance services. I have to say that one of the things I enjoy most about working with the board of EMS Europe is that everybody is kind and patient. So if you don't understand something, you would never ever be scared to ask in that situation. Or even at the Congress, we add a question and answer session to most of our sessions, the exception being the championship, really. But we add question and answer, and we encourage that sort of, because how do you learn if you don't ask questions,
Yeah, absolutely. So moving on, you've mentioned the Congress sort of quite a lot. I'm keen to hear you, in terms of EMS as a system, what's on the horizons for you for the next sort of like 12 months? And is there any sort of key things that are going to be coming out that we should be sort of looking out for as really important pieces of learning that are on the horizon? Be really, really good to hear about any of them.
Yeah, so I mentioned, I think already, the EMS white paper. So that is that's a collaboration between all of the board members. They've each drafted a chapter and contributed to it. So that's been a big focus over the last sort of 2 to 3 years for the board. We're forging alliances with other resuscitation academies, or sometimes as they're known, alliances. That will continue ongoing. The Congress is the biggest thing that's looming on the horizon. So we intended to come back with a Congress last year. For various logistical and financial reasons, that wasn't possible. But we joined up with a few organisations in Sweden who have been also very collaborative and very helpful. And we are hosting a Congress in Sweden, in Stockholm, from the 2nd to the 4th of June. It's a 3-day Congress. I think we have delegations at the moment from at least 20 different countries. So I'm really looking forward to it. It is going to be a huge event on our calendar. We have 3 days of sessions. The last day is predominantly what we call the EMS labs, which are teaching sessions. So we have, I think, 8 different labs that repeat throughout the day. So you can attend 4 because they repeat 4 times. And we also have, obviously, panel sessions, workshop sessions, discussions. We have a range of incredible sponsors who are exhibiting. So these people tend to be medical companies. So they'll be showing the latest technology that they've developed. So you can learn a bit from that. It might not be something that's on offer in the UK, but it doesn't mean you can't learn from it. And yeah, the Congress really is the biggest sort of spot on the horizon for us. We've already started talks about where we will hold the Congress in the future. We are hoping for a 2027 Congress, but as yet we don't have a venue booked. So the aim over the next 6 months for me is to get the building blocks in place for the next Congress and to make sure that this upcoming one in 2025 is a real success story. Yeah, we want to keep it rolling. So we have to be set up to do that. We have to keep adding board members from other countries. And we have to push forward to share more via our congresses. In the meantime, and we are in early discussions about this, I would like to do something that bridges the gap between this Congress and the next one. So whether that's an online learning event, whether that's a YouTube series, I think we could be doing a lot more to share some of the learning that's currently sitting within the group to a wider audience. So that's kind of my function with the board is talking about and planning how we can do that in between congresses, because you shouldn't have to wait 2 years to learn about the most recent developments that could impact your patient care.
And for us to sort of find out about sort of things going on within EMS, how would we find out about that? Because obviously, if there's lots of learning going to be sort of dropped into these conversations, where would you find out? Is it all on via the internet? Is it via Twitter? Is it where's it by? Well, it's X now, isn't it? It's not Twitter.
Yeah, so we have a we have a website for the company, which is emseurope.org. We also have a separate website for the Congress. The reason that the Congress website is separate is because it is a collaboration between ourselves, EMS Europe, and some other organisations in Sweden. So they also handle our tickets and registrations. So the Congress website is emscongress2025.org. Everything to do with EMS Europe and the Congress is shared on the EMS Europe social medias. We're on Instagram at European_EMS. You can find us on Facebook at European EMS. We are on X as well, although I appreciate not everybody is a fan of that platform these days. We've moved to Blue Sky, and you can find us on LinkedIn, Threads, and YouTube.
So you're everywhere, really, aren't you?
Yeah.
That's the end of it, isn't it? Right. And so coming to the end of this little conversation now, as a comms sort of specialist, which is what you are, communications specialist, One of the hardest things that I find when, we've got learning that we want to share and we've got learning that we want to disseminate, and we just want to get stuff out and about so people can sort of hear it, see it, read it, whatever, is if you could give us sort of that one piece of advice on how to get that piece of information out there, what would it be?
So, I mean, it's very kind of you to call me a comms specialist. I sort of fell into this role and I've learned as I go. But if I was going to give one piece of advice, it would be something that was told to me when I did just one tiny advertising module as part of my degree, which is not in advertising. But the advice was tell them and tell them again. And that doesn't mean what people think it means. It doesn't mean shove the information down their throat one way continually. It means find as many avenues as possible to disseminate the information, because like we've just talked about, not everybody is a fan of Twitter/X because of, world events. Not everybody wants to be on that platform. So if you're only using that to disseminate your information, you're not going to reach a large portion of people. Similarly, not everybody is a fan of Facebook anymore. So you have to split your approach between multiple platforms. The second thing I would say really is that we've seen a big shift towards video in the last sort of 5 years or so of social media. And if you're interested in communications and social media, you tend to follow what other people are saying and the discussions that are had about the algorithms for social media, because if you're not working with the algorithms, your content isn't going to be seen. Mm-hmm. So I pay attention to that stuff, and I've noticed that most social media platforms will push video content more via their algorithm than they will static content. There's a slight regression on Instagram towards photo at the moment, but video is key. And what I've learned there through different mini courses I've been on and things where I've been trying to learn a bit more about how these algorithms work is that you have to grab people's attention within the first 3 seconds of a video. So if you aren't telling them up front what they're going to learn from that video, either because you've titled it correctly or because your presenter has said it straight away in the first 3 seconds, then you're not immediately going to grab people and you risk them scrolling on. So they would be like my key sort of points at the moment. But the way that social media is and the fact that it's a very technology-based resource is that it is going to evolve and it is always going to change the same way that conversation has evolved throughout history. So you have to just roll with those changes as they come up.
Really fascinating. Yeah, because I think it is the speed of change is nuts at the minute, isn't it? The speed that everything is changing around technology and about the use of it and about how you can apply it. And I think if you don't get on board with that, you are going to be left behind, aren't you, in terms of the work that you're doing. So it's really fascinating that you're talking about understanding the algorithms and things like that. That sends my brain a bit pop, if I'm going to be truly honest. But that's why we have people like you in the world, Sarah, who can do that sort of stuff. So I'd just like to say thank you very much for your time this morning. It's been really interesting talking to you about it and about EMS and about the really good work that you're doing around shared learning, because it is a passion of mine, is the fact that, all of this knowledge should be out there for everybody to sort of digest and utilise, because it just makes everybody's work life, in terms of our work as paramedics or as technicians or as whatever role we do within the emergency care setting, more fulfilling, and feeling that you are sort of at the forefront of what's going on. Because if you didn't share that information, the chance of me finding out that information of what's going on in Sweden, it's never going to happen really, whereas you seem to be that funnel.
So I'm just going to share this that Fiona Moore wrote to me about how real-time learning has been shared via EMS Europe. So she wrote that lessons on trauma care from the military experience in Afghanistan, with the emphasis on high-quality buddy first aid, rapid evacuation supported by experienced pre-hospital care providers, and the ability to deliver advanced airway management, early radiological and surgical interventions and evacuation to level 4 centres within 24 hours, all this built on the experience in Vietnam. So if you hadn't learned from the experience in Vietnam, we wouldn't have had what we had going into the experience that the UK military had in Afghanistan. She also shared that across Europe we learn from practice in the Far East, including management of out-of-hospital cardiac arrest. And we also learn from the USA around various topics, but in particular illicit drug use, because whatever starts in the USA does then tend to travel across the pond.
And that comes back to like the shared learning when you talked about COVID, that the ones with the knowledge at the time share that knowledge, so then everybody benefits for what's coming in the future. Like you said, around sort of we learned in the Vietnamese War, which then that was a basis to learn for other conflicts. And everything like that happens is another foundation to build on, isn't it? And the important thing is if you don't build on them and you don't share the learning, then all we do is go backwards. Because that learning nobody gets anything from. So that sort of shows the fundamental need and the fundamental reasons that when bad things happen, it is, I suppose, there is an awful lot of learning that can be taken from them scenarios, whether it be world events, whether it be sort of climate change, whether it be all these things that are on the horizon. Shared learning is going to be even more important than it's ever been.
And I think this is where the mantra of EMS Europe really comes in, because their mantra is it takes a system to save a life. I'm not a clinician, but I don't need to be to share this information with other clinicians. So if I'm part of the system and I can use my area of knowledge and skills to help other people, then that's a benefit. So if you ignore one part of the system, you're going to lose out for the other parts.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's sort of such a powerful way to end, because every role is important within these things, and you sort of, they're all of equal importance. So thank you very much for bringing that up. It's a really sort of nice way to finish this little interview off. And I hope you enjoy the rest of your day, and I hope the Congress goes really well. And I really do hope some of the listeners can sort of go on the website and just have a look and see what it's all about, because I think a lot of people find it sort of quite interesting and fascinating, really. So thank you very much. It's been much appreciated.
You're listening to the Pre-Hospital Care podcast on the Medics Academy Network.